Okay, I just got done watching a video entitled "What If You Are Wrong?" It was a pretty good video. I would have gave you 5 stars if you hadn't disabled the rating. I thought it was definitely worth watching, and unlike the other "What If You're Wrong" videos, actually had some pretty good points in it. So I'm going to go ahead and address these really quick. I'm going to try to make it as quick as I can, because I've only got 10 minutes. Alright, first off, I appreciate that you mentioned how you would answer the question. If it was asked of you, that's not something that theists typically do. And I think you've essentially answered it pretty much how most theists would. There is one problem with it, however, and that is that it only addresses what if atheists are right, not what if somebody else is right. I'll get into that a little bit more later. But as far as the answer goes, it was correct, but it was incomplete. You asked if being separated from God was a serious condition. Most atheists would consider themselves to live without God anyway. And, I've lived without God for quite a while. Most other atheists have lived without God for a while. I would even go so far as to say, looking back on when I was a Christian, I don't believe that what I felt was God in my life at the time really was God. So as far as I'm concerned, I've been separated from God for 30 years already, not to mention the 14 billion that I wasn't alive beforehand. So I don't see how separation is necessarily a bad thing. Now, if eternal torture was on the table, like a lot of Christians believe, then yeah, I would think it was a serious question. But being separated from God, or simply ceasing to exist, or something along those lines, doesn't bother me at all. You asked if I rejected God altogether, what moral standard would I have? I've got another video that talks about morality, so I'm not going to get into detail about it here. But basically, my morality is based objectively on what causes suffering, what prevents suffering, and the gray areas are made up of basically something that can cause suffering to some and can alleviate suffering in others. So those are a bit debatable, but overall, typically, if it causes a lot of suffering without a lot of return, I consider it to be generally wrong, and I don't need God for that. So as far as I'm concerned, saying that God doesn't exist at all, not that I actually say that, I'm agnostic, but assuming that God doesn't exist at all, I would still have the objective moral standard of, does it hurt you? Then I'm not going to do it. Does it hurt you a little but give you a benefit in return? Well, then, let's examine it a little farther. Does it do nothing but benefit you? Then there's no reason not to do it. It's basically that. Then you said something about watching a suicide attempt. If I was watching a suicide attempt, would I attempt to stop it? Well, of course I would. Anybody would. The problem that I have with your analogy is that it's not suicide, it's murder. God set up a system, a very terrible system. He set up a system where you cannot be forgiven without a blood sacrifice. He set up a system where the majority of mankind would be punished for eternity. You seem to be saying it's a separation from God situation. Some say it's eternal torment in hell itself. Some say it's eternal nothingness. The Mormons, I believe, say it's a cold, dark place. Whatever the case may be, what did Jesus say? Broad was the way that went to destruction, but narrow is the path that leads to life. This shows that he knows the majority of mankind would be going off into death, and this is based on the system that God set in place. And he didn't set it up in such a way, he didn't set it up for it to be a successful system, he set it up to be a failure of a system, which it very much is. And with prophecy after prophecy stating that mankind would get more and more wicked, which would be one that I would have to disagree with the fulfillment of. But that's for a different conversation. But even so, just the fact that he made that response implies that not only is the path broad, it's going to get broader and broader. So not only did God create a failed system, he created a system that was set up to fail and then fail worse and worse and worse as time went on, and to allow more and more and more people to be destroyed, rather than, this salvation. And the only mechanism for salvation is to reject the critical thinking abilities that God's giving you. The very same critical thinking abilities that lead you to understand and be able to logically deduce why other religions are wrong are the very same reasons that atheists apply to yours and then reject yours for the very same reasons. And so that tells me that you have to shut off your critical thinking when it comes to your specific religion. And it's not unique to Christianity. It's every religion, every theist I've ever had a chance to deal with suspends that critical thinking ability. But the bottom line is God set it up so that you have a critical thinking ability, but you have to shut it off in order to get the reward that he wants to give you. That's not a suicide system. That's not a system where somebody knows full well what they're doing, how they're doing it, and going about it, and does it anyway. That's a system where one person sets up a trap. It's kind of like the Saw movies. He set up a system, put you in it, and said it's now up to you to get out of this bad situation. I'm going to tell you how to do it, and you just got to believe in Jesus. He's in the other room. I'm not going to show him to you, but you have to, deep in your heart, believe him. And there's just too many people who can't do it. Faith is not a virtue. It's simply belief without evidence, and that's not a verifiable belief. So as far as I'm concerned, it's a bad analogy, because it's not suicide, it's murder. Too many people, if God were real, if the Bible were true, too many people would be not believing in it, not because they're wicked people, not because they have bad hearts, not because they want to sin or do evil deeds, but because of the fact they just don't see the evidence, and they say, I can't do it. Faith to me is meaningless, because evidence is how we verify something is true. And that's a trait that God gave us. So as far as I'm concerned, he set it up that way. He's responsible. You did mention that wouldn't it be wise to choose different beliefs? But no, it wouldn't. Because belief isn't a choice. You didn't choose to be a Christian. You feel convinced that Christianity is correct. By the same token, I can't choose to believe in Christianity. I either need to be convinced or I need to be left alone. Because I can't just decide one day, well, I'm afraid of hell, so I'll believe in Jesus. And so then we move on to the big question. What if you're wrong? I think it'd be unfair for me to address everything else without actually addressing the question. So, I'm going to lay it out there. It's not about whether I'm wrong. It's about who's right. If you're right, I spend eternity in hell, or away from God, or whatever. If Islam is correct, however, you and I are both screwed because we have rejected the one true God. And the Quran is very clear about it. That means that you and I are to spend eternity in a place of fire where the demons... Anyway, so it's not a question of what if you're wrong. It's a question of what if you're right. And like I said, we already established what happens if you're right, and I can establish that same answer with any individual of whatever belief. But I can't say if I'm wrong I'm going to hell, because I don't know that. If we're all wrong, and we're all going wherever.